So, Jesper, the scene is yours.
And thank you so much, Max. And first of all, thank you so much to all of you for having me tonight. I'm very pleased to be here. And in addition to doing good geothermal projects, an important part of our work is to talk with stakeholders about our work and what challenges we perceive in order for us to contribute to the green transition. And I also have a dialogue with citizens. So I will do this presentation in English. My mother tongue is Danish. I do understand some Swedish, but in order for me to make sure that my points are not lost in translation, I will be speaking in English. So I hope that's okay with you. And if you do have any questions, please let me know afterwards. And you're also very welcome to reach out to me if I can help you with any answers to my presentation. I did bring a presentation as well that I will share. So I will share my screen just a minute. And it should be good like this. So please let me know if you are not viewing my screen. But as I stated initially, I come from a Danish company called Energy. We are a relatively new company. We're only 5-6 years old. So by now, I think we would start elementary school if we were a child. And what we do is geothermal heating. So basically, geothermal heating is heat from the Earth's interior that we bring to the citizens of Europe. Right now, we are 70 employees. We are scaling quite fast. We signed our first contract in Aarhus, which is the second largest city in Denmark, a year and a half ago. And since then, things have gone quite fast. We are quite an international office with 12 nationalities based here in Copenhagen, Denmark. And just to bring you up to speed to who our company is, we did sign a contract to deliver geothermal heat in Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark, 1.5 years ago. And we are about to start drilling for this heat in around a month's time. And since then, we have experienced quite a lot of interest from other European cities. So we have also signed so-called letters of intent since then in other European cities. And that basically means that we want to explore the geothermal potential and negotiate a contract with our customer there. So there are quite a lot of other Danish cities who are interested, but we are also right now active in Germany, in Poland and Budapest. And obviously we would like to see that grow even further in the future. So as you all have known, the company I'm representing has set out on a mission to decarbonize heat. And we do believe that we can make great contributions, just the way that solar and wind has done for electricity. And since we are in Sweden, at least for me virtually right now, I could also add hydropower here. We do believe that geothermal can do the same for heating, where we can provide the clean energy to the citizens of Europe. So today, for the next 25-something minutes, I would like to get through this agenda with you guys. I would first of all like to talk about why it is important to decarbonize heat in Europe. Traditionally, we have relied a lot on, but the future needs to be green, as we all know, and we believe that we can play a part in that. Then I'll also touch upon Energi, our company, and what we do and how our geothermal technology can help here in Denmark and in other countries in Europe, and perhaps also areas in Sweden. Then I'd like to talk a bit about what is the potential, what political barriers do we encounter, since you are a political audience. I've also brought a few points around that. And then obviously I'll make sure to have time for questions in the end. So if we zoom in a bit on decarbonizing our heating sector, there are 3 key elements that both drive the concerns for most of our customers, but also the society as a whole and the individuals that live in them. First of all, we've all witnessed this summer how climate change is not something intangible and an elusive thing that might happen in the future. The climate change is happening right now, and personally, I believe it's quite frightening. And we all know that it's no longer just about avoiding climate change anymore. Now it's about limiting its detrimental effects on our societies. So to mitigate most of that, we need some big solutions, and big solutions can be many things, but one thing it can also be is heating and the decarbonization of it. You all do know about the Paris Agreement and how we must reduce our emissions drastically and rapidly, so I won't be speaking too much about that. But rather, I would like to speak to you about the key role that heating is going to play and can play. You all know about the aviation industry and our diets and how that's usually highlighted in the environmental discussions, but the heat that we use to heat our homes, our commercial buildings, and our industry plays just as big as a role in the overall game. For many years, we have relied on fossil fuels such as coal and oil and natural gas to heat our buildings, and more than 17% of our energy emissions stem from the consumption in our buildings. And a large chunk of that goes into heating our homes. Actually, more than half of the energy we use in our buildings is in our homes. So there's a major potential to decarbonize the heat that we use for heating our homes. So being the sister countries that we are in Denmark and Sweden, our heat production is also quite similar. Around 1/4 or 1/5 of the heat that we use in Denmark and Sweden stems from waste incineration. So that is when we basically set fire to waste and generate heat from that. In many other countries, you don't do that process. Rather, you put it in landfills where it emits methane, for example. So it's not a bad thing per se that we incinerate the waste. It also generates this heat for our buildings. But we also use a lot of biofuels, and the biofuels consist of 53% of the heat here in Denmark and 48% in Sweden. That's the latest numbers. And biofuels can come from a variety of sources, but it can, for example, be wood pellets and wood chips and straw. So 74% of the heat that we use in Denmark and Sweden comes from either waste or from biofuels. There is an ongoing debate around the climate and the biodiversity friendliness of biofuels, and I won't be going into that today, but what we can look into rather is the massive use of gas and coal and oil we have in other European countries. You can see here that in countries like Germany and Poland, there's still used a lot of natural gas to use for heat in buildings, and in Hungary they do use a lot of coal. And if we look on Europe on a more broad level, then I've done something here that I don't think for presentation purposes is not very good. That is bringing a really big table, but I've tried to whiten out the less important ones and only highlight the 2021 numbers. If you follow the red arrows, then you can see how much heat was generated in the European Union in 2021 from solid fossil fuels. So that is primarily coal, and that's quite a lot. It's 150,000 gigawatt hours. And if you look at natural gas, then you can see that number is even bigger if you follow the yellow line. So the exact numbers here are not that important. It's more all in all that the heat that is generated from renewables, and here we also calculate biofuels and renewable waste as being renewable, then only 33% of the heat that we generated in the EU in 2021 came from renewable sources. So that means that 2/3 does not come from renewable sources, obviously. And if we are to take out biomass as well from the equation, then it's only 9% of the heat that we generate in the EU that was generated from geothermal and solar, heat pumps, and other renewable sources. So obviously the positive angle to this is that there's a lot of potential to decarbonize even further, so we can hopefully both reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, but also decarbonize our heating system as a whole. So then there was this second trend out of the three trends that I've brought to you that I would like to touch upon. So I'm not entirely sure if it's the same case in Sweden, but ever since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the suspension of gas purchases from Russia, there's been a resulting uncertainty in the supply chains that has got a lot of media attention here in Denmark around the rising cost of energy. It has especially hit hard on those with an individual heating solution where they have a small gas boiler close to the house that relies on gas, or it could also be oil. And that is also the case in Germany and other European countries. So I imagine it's the same in Sweden, where the gas price has gone up and the energy markets more in general have seen a lot of volatility. So a second driver for us, but also for societies in general, is stability around the supply and the price of energy. And sorry for me bringing a lot of charts, but I think it's quite important to emphasize the points I'm trying to make. So every now and then the price for gas and energy has these spikes. And it was the case in the early 2000s. It was also the case around the financial crisis. And it's also been the case here around the war in Ukraine. So obviously this price usually stabilizes, but it happens. But when it happens, it has a lot of impact on societies as a whole, and the economies, but also on people just like you and me. So here in Denmark, this did not only impact low-income families, low-income households. It was also families with a regular income who all of a sudden had a hard time paying their bills because they had a gas boiler at home. And even here in Denmark, we had to lower the temperature in our public buildings to 19 degrees to save on our energy. So it's an issue when we rely too much on one or a few sources of energy, because then we become very sensitive to what happens on the energy markets. Instead, in the district heating system, we also rely very much now on biomass. We have seen right now that there's an issue when you rely too much on gas. And even though prices are quite cheap on biomass for now, you can have the same concern about the future of biomass. Biomass can be used for a lot of different things. You can burn wood to make heat for homes. You can make biofuels, so ships can sail on them, and you can also use the wood for heating in industries and many different things. And just as recent today, there's a media article right here in Denmark around the fact that we use 1 billion corn on the cob, I've heard it's called. So I think in Swedish it would be something like majskolvar. 1 billion of those we use for biofuels for our cars. And if you factor in soybeans and sugar canes and other types of biogenic material that could be used for food, the Danish consumption of these sources could also have been used to feed more than 2 million people. So many organizations have tried to calculate or estimate how much sustainable biomass is available in the future. And the estimate from the organization that is called the ETC is that in the future we can have around 40 to 60 exojoules of supply of these sustainable biomass sources. Now, the graph on the left here, it shows you how much bioenergy is needed if a given sector is to convert all of its current energy needs to bio-based sources. And as you can see, if we are to convert aviation, for example, in shipping, then we've used almost all of our bio-based sources in the future. So it's very likely that biomass in the future will become a commodity, that there's a competition around, and it's likely that the prices will go up, and it can be hard for heating companies to buy biomass. So the third trend before coming to our technology is a rather brief one, and it's also a bit technical, but it's a quite important point I'd like to make in 2 or 3 slides. As you may remember from one of my previous slides, then the way that we've traditionally produced heat here in Denmark and also in Sweden is through incineration. So that can be through waste, or it could be through biomass sources such as wood. And when you incinerate these sources, then you generate a lot of power. And that power can be sold on the electricity market. And that is pretty good business because you can make quite a lot of money from electricity. So in reality, the heat is just a byproduct from this power generation that you've done traditionally. But in the future, as we gradually are going to rely less on incineration technologies, and when we're going to transition towards new sources of electricity, then we will not have the same amount of surplus heat that we do today from the power generation. So we will both have a need for a lot of power, and we will not generate any heat from a windmill spinning around or from solar panels absorbing the energy from the sun. So we need to have new technologies that are efficient in power consumption, that can generate clean and renewable heat. And that's obviously where geothermal comes into the picture. So this was just to give you an overall introduction to the main trends that are driving both the transition we're going to see in Denmark and other European countries in Sweden, and also what is driving the need for geothermal across borders. So what we're all here for is geothermal, obviously. So if we turn our attention towards geothermal and how we hope and believe that we can contribute to the green transition, if you look on the picture to your right, then you can see a recent picture that we've taken here in Energy. What you see is 4 vehicles that look almost like they are bound for a mission on Mars. But in fact, it is something called a vibro truck. And since our technology depends on finding hot water a couple of kilometers below ground, then we need to know about the ground and the subsurface and how it looks. And therefore, we use these trucks. So during April, May, and June, these 4 vibro trucks were driving around Denmark to Aarhus, Holbæk, and Copenhagen, 3 cities that we hopefully will deliver heat to very soon. And what they do is that they go for 10 to 20 meters, and then they come to a stop, send the vibrations down the ground, and then they are reflected in the subsurface back to the surface, where small microphones catch the vibrations. And from that, we can generate a map from the subsurface, so we know more about it and know where to drill for the heat. So geothermal energy, as you all know, the core of the Earth is very, very hot, and it's actually more than 5,000 degrees warm. The heat from the core of the Earth radiates towards the surface, so around 1 kilometer below ground, you can find a temperature of 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. If you go 2 kilometers below ground, then it's around 60 to 65 degrees Celsius. And that means, in fact, that right below our feet is a tremendous source of heat that we can use to produce heat for our homes. So the way our technology works is that we construct at least 2 wells. The first well is the orange one you can see to the left on the illustration right here, and that's called a production well. And the production well is used to pump up the warm water from the subsurface. When the warm water reaches the surface, it goes into our facility where we can extract the heat from the water before we pump it right down again through the injection well. That's the blue well to the left of the other well. And then the heat that we extract from this process, we can use to heat up the district heating water, and then we can heat up cities and homes instead of burning coal, for example. So why is it that this technology is a good idea? Well, there are 3 main benefits of geothermal energy. It's climate friendly, it's citizen friendly, and there's also a secure supply of heat for many years and even decades. First of all, there's a quite obvious reason. It's good for the climate. Our geothermal operations does not have any emissions when it's in operation. We do use a bit of power to extract the heat. We need a pump to extract the water from the subsurface. But if that runs on green energy, it could, for example, be windmills or hydro, then we are emissions-free, in fact. And also, this is not just something that makes an impact locally. We can actually deploy this at scale as well. And 20% of Europe's heat in the future can come from geothermal. And we are strong believers that we can make an impact through this. And in the city of Aarhus, where we are doing our first project, we will in fact deliver 20% of the future heat in Aarhus by 2030. Then I also stated that it's friendly towards citizens. And one of the reasons is that our facility is quite small. We do in fact only need 400 or 500 square meters on the surface, and inside the facility you have access to the heat pumps, and the wells themselves don't take up much space. Also, there are no noise or any emissions from the facility, so the surrounding environment around the facility are not impacted by our operations in any way. And as a matter of fact, as you can see to your right on the illustrations right here, we can integrate the facilities into urban areas. Obviously, you can do a greening of the exterior, as the first drawing shows, so it looks pretty and people don't mind being neighbors to one of our facilities. But you can also go even further and do recreational stuff around it. So you can have a playground or a climbing wall, a basketball court, or just a park for people to thrive in. So clearly, there's a discussion about who to finance these recreational activities around it, but you could do some quite nice facilities in this way. And then lastly, I also stated that there's a stable supply of heat for many years. Geothermal is inherently local, so given that you have a windmill or another power source close by, you can do the heating, or you can produce all the heat and energy in the vicinity of a square kilometer. So you don't need import from other countries or anything like that. Also, we don't rely on the wind to blow or the sun to shine, so it's also a very stable energy source, and you also have quite stable prices for the 30 years that we are operational for, which is also a good thing towards citizens. So lastly, given the political nature of my audience, I've brought a few points about geothermal potential for Europe that I would also like to touch upon briefly, and also touch a bit about Sweden here. So apart from the need of a favorable subsurface that we obviously need to do geothermal, one condition that needs to be in place for us is somewhere to send the heat. It does not matter if we can extract a lot of heat from the ground and then we don't have anywhere to send it. So we need a system that can take the heat that we produce. And obviously the best system for that is district heating or fjärrvärme. The map on your right shows you the current status of district heating in Europe. As you can see, district heating has successfully been rolled out in the past decades in Denmark, in Sweden, in the Baltics, and in the big parts of Eastern Europe as well. Now, district heating, that's usually a good idea for places where it gets quite cold and where people live more or less close to each other. So it does make sense, after all, why there is not a lot of district heating in Portugal, because it does not get very cold for very long in Portugal. But there is a huge potential to expand district heating even further than we already did in Europe, in countries like Germany, in the Netherlands, in northern France, in the United Kingdom, and also other places. For example, here in Denmark, we have a large urban area north of Copenhagen that we have started to convert to district heating that relied on gas in the past. And I'm sure that's also the case for many areas in Sweden that did not have district heating in the past. When the energy crisis happened last year and the heating bills exploded for many people, the Danish government mandated that every municipality needed to communicate to its citizens whether or not they could be included in the district heating system. And we do believe that's a very good thing. So on our very selfish wish list, our number one priority, or our number one wish for politicians, both locally, nationally, and in Europe, is to increase and speed up the rollout of district heating in Europe. We see that district heating is an optimal collective solution for most societies. Rather than building overcapacity and supply everyone with an individual heat pump, we believe very much in district heating. And why is that? Well, district heating is just a transmission system, really. You can attach all sort of production technologies to it. That can be geothermal, it can be waste heat, it can be solar power, solar heat, it could be air heat pumps, and many other sources. And you can balance your exposure to the electricity market. So you both have power producing technologies and power consuming technologies. So if you just have an individual heat pump at home, you're very much exposed to the power prices, and you're also you have a lot of overcapacity. But we see district heating as a very good way to balance this. Also, if we are to move away from big centralized plants in Europe that run on coal or other sources, we also need these electricity-based sources like geothermal or other heat pumps. We also need some space for them. We need to be close to the cities that we are going to supply with geothermal heat, so the water doesn't get cold before we can deliver it to the citizens that need it. However, there is a fierce competition in the urban areas in Europe and in the cities for available land and plots. And we, as an energy company, cannot compete with big real estate developers They can build apartments that are quite expensive and therefore also can pay for a plot, and they can even sometimes pay hundreds of millions of kroner for a plot. So therefore, our prayer is that we need space allocated for energy production locally. And as I've hopefully shown you, we can also do it in a way where it's quite aesthetically pleasing. Then it also takes quite a lot of time to get permits for geothermal and also other renewable energy sources, I believe. You need environmental assessments, you need licenses, and you also need to be in contact with a lot of public authorities. That can be the water authority, it can be the mining authority, and it can also be the authority that's in charge of plots, for example, and many other authorities. We do have a tremendous amount of respect for the processes of the public administration, but we also need some sustainable change quite fast to decarbonize our heat. So we do see that there's a room for improvement in this area. And then lastly, there's been a lot of exploration for gas and oil in Europe in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And the subsurface of Europe has been mapped many times, but or in many areas at least. And a lot of that data is not publicly available. We think that's a shame because it delays the processes for the public good quite a bit, and it makes it more expensive. I'm not necessarily arguing that all data that the private companies have should be made publicly available right away, but we could look into how we could do something about making past data available that does not have a lot of commercial value anymore. So it should not be publicly available right away, I believe, because there will probably limit willingness to invest, but there's room for improvement here, I think, also. But then lastly, what about Sweden? So Sweden has one very successful geothermal plant that's in Lund in Skåne. And it has been operational ever since the 1980s, and it does deliver a big chunk of the annual heat in Lund in Skåne. In southern Sweden, so that's in Skåne and in Blekinge especially, you will find a subsurface that is quite similar to what most of Denmark has. So the type of geothermal we can do, that we do, is quite viable in southern Sweden, and there could also be a potential in cities like Malmö, in Helsingborg, and in Lund, obviously. If we look at the rest of Sweden, then it's a bit more tricky. Your pleasant country rests on crystalline bedrock, so that's a source like granite, for example. And there's a lot of good things about that. About the Swedish geology. You have some amazing mountains, and and we don't here in Denmark, which is quite boring. So and also other good things about the geology of Sweden. But it does make geothermal a bit more tricky because you don't have these sand layers that we are usually targeting. So it's not impossible to do geothermal in the rest of Sweden, but it is a bit more challenging because of the subsurface. So it's a bit more risky and it's a bit more expensive. So you can't do it. It is possible to do it north of Skåne and Blekinge, but it's more expensive and a bit more risky because you are going into granite, and then you might have to do fracking, which is not all the time popular, but it can be a solution to do geothermal. And there are other geothermal opportunities and other geothermal plants in place right now in Sweden that are operational, but I just wanted to highlight this one in Lund because it's quite similar to what we do in Denmark. So that was my 30 minutes and my presentation around geothermal, both the challenges we face on a macro scale, the challenges we face as a company, but also the very big opportunities that we see in decarbonizing heat in Denmark, in Sweden, and more generally in Europe. So I know we have quite a bit of time left, so I'm very open to your questions. I will try to answer them regardless of whether they are in Swedish or in English. I'm looking forward to them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jesper. And I will stop the recording right now. Just 1 second.